Hello, thank you for your attention. My name is Tatzia Langlo from the University of California, Santa Barbara. This presentation is on global policy and public service institution transformations. It's an interdisciplinary research model construction. To begin, I discuss the purpose of an interdisciplinary research model, the global public service institutional analysis model, what is the GPSIM. I'll go briefly into applications planned and that are possible, and then I'll discuss briefly next steps of continued research that have been planned so far. So the purpose of an interdisciplinary research model. Global studies crosses intertwined world systems, economics, health, science, and technology, social justice, education, and more. When interdisciplinary researchers collaborate to find the relations, patterns, dynamics, institutional and social transformation, such as construction of social cultural norms, audiences increase and enhance capacity for effective social democratic participation. There can also be an enhanced identification of key actors, events, patterns, and interpretation and implementation being mirrored across diverse fields and sectors, and that can enhance clarity and accuracy in results than do studies focusing on a single field and or sector. World systems are complex. Collaboration enhances the perspectives, resources, and spaces where the effects of globalization are occurring that can be explored and examined through critical collaboration. So what is the GPSIM? It's a bricolage model, obviously. It begins with a cube, the comparative cube. I don't consider the cube as a phase of the research of the bricolage, but I do consider it as a foundation of which the three stages are built on. The first phase of study is actually global public service policy analysis model, which has been developed from critical global education policy analysis. And actually, both can be used and applied in the bricolage. It follows with institutional analysis model and explanation outcome, which is a variant of process tracing. So it begins with the cube and the explosion of the cube. And there are many examples of explosion of the cube as to what was traditionally applied in comparative studies, but this using the comparative units presented by them and adapted to global policy rather than education policy, I think is an example of exploding the cube. There are multiple forms of comparative research which are part of an evolving corpus of approaches used by global scholars across and within diversity of fields and practitioners. Comparative research methods alone can be interpreted and applied in various ways in different countries, institutions, and by research practitioners. So critical global policy analysis has been the work of other educational researchers. In this introduction to global policy and GPSIM model, I draw heavily on the work of Verger et al. By adopting some critical questions regarding global education policy into components of analysis that can be applied to global public service policy more broadly. Included in this construction of this analysis framework are emphases of Dale, whose scholarship has helped to lay a foundation to mechanisms of influence, and Robertson, who has developed the notion of sociocultural construction. The GPS analysis is depicted on the. So this global policy analysis includes an implementation component that aims to understand how and why global policies are formed and implemented through means of adoption or adaptation. The GPS analysis also includes an impact component which involves the reach and effects of the policy, if outcomes are positive or negative, according to whom. A third component investigates political and or economic transformation that shapes or is shaped by global policy or policy reform. This component aims to reveal global mechanisms connected to sociocultural construction. A fourth component of the GPS analysis investigates actors, representatives, or institutions facilitating and or mediating interpretation and implementation of global policy to or on behalf of practitioners particular to social, local, or global context. A fifth analysis component examines limitations, constraints, and or problems at the ground level due to intended or unintended impact of GPS policy. By providing such an explicit framework on the previous slide for the GPS policy analysis component, here an adaptation of that framework is provided in order to demonstrate that the GPS-IM can and indeed must be adopted and integrated according to the kind of discipline, field, or particular nature of public service being examined and compared. The second phase of research in the bricolage is developed by the work of Healy, adopted for global policy more in general. It's developed, and Healy developed an institutional analysis model consisting of 4 stages. The 4 stages include 1, an explanation of events and their involved evaluation process, 2, the connection of events and roles of actors, the power relations between them, through evaluation processes, 3, evaluations of the strategies and related interests that form the process and have an influence on the roles played in events planned that do or do not occur, and 4, the relationship between resources, rules, and ideas, and their relations with community. Process tracing is the explanation outcome variant of process tracing is the one I am least familiar with so far. The remaining phase of the GPS-IM bricolage research model is this process tracing method. Although the first 2 phases of the bricolage do not necessarily need to be conducted in a linear order, it is so far imagined and understood that this last phase does finalize the research cycle, as it involves the analysis of interpretations and produced results. The explanation outcome variant of process tracing allows for enhanced credibility of inferences drawn from matured inferences. The aim of using explanation outcome process tracing as a tertiary analysis process is to try to establish minimally sufficient explanations of outcomes produced from each specific case within a study. In a comparative study involving more than one case or multiple levels and units within a case, separate explanation outcome process tracing analyses would need to occur before finding similarities and differences of comparison. Observed outcomes are categorized as systematic, macro level, or non-systematic, or micro level causal mechanisms. Unlike the 2 other variants of process tracing, theory testing and theory building, explanation outcome process tracing is not used to generate universal claims. Rather, this process of analysis assists in invalidating theoretical claims that are inadequately tested at ground level applications and where outcomes are misrepresented in civil society discourse. A basic framework for explanation outcome process tracing is presented here, however, would need to be adapted for a contextual situation of each unique study. So the possible applications of planned studies are, as I said, to global education policy on its own, such as education for all. Another independent study could also be global housing policy of education or housing for all. However, as I said already, we want to do those 2 independent studies and then share them collaboratively to compare the similar patterns of change of the institutions of those 2 public services. Other studies to continue are healthcare for all, justice for all, MDGs and SDGs, and global policy related to all of those campaigns. Next, explicit continued research of the GPS-IM is planned to be employed for an interdisciplinary study examining the influences of global policy on the transformation of education and housing institutions, exploding the comparative cube. Site in particular institution to be selected is not yet determined. Primary research question is to what extent does policy interpretation and implementation align with stakeholders at local levels of impact. And the purpose of the study is to create awareness of dominant global policy patterns on the shaping of social democracy and the rising capacity of economic elitists to develop enhanced platforms in global cities by determining access and eligibility in school and housing institutions according to contingencies that promote consumer behaviors to serve capital interests. Thank you very much, and we hope to hear from you. We look forward to questions and feedback regarding areas of limitations and application of this research model and the continued study shared in the previous slide or others that the model might be applied to. We also look forward to learning from scholars of the global studies knowledge community of other possible applications of this research framework and proposals for collaborative projects using the GPSIM or adaptations of it. My name is Tatzia Langlo. My email is on the first page, and we thank UPO for sponsoring this study.